I'm Tom Vasel. Welcome to Lookback, where I take a look at reviews that I did a year, 5 years, and 10 years ago, and tell you what I think about them now. So let's go back a year ago, where I took a look at Make It Happen. This is a really terrible game based on the fashion, which is not I mean, it's a theme some people like or don't like, but the theme is not the problem here. The problem with this game is you're working together team versus team and playing this really boring card game, trying to get these dresses together. There's so many things about this that look cool, but it comes together in a really boring way. Florenza dice game. This is one of the most complicated dice roll and write games I've ever played. And I think it's too complex for what the game does. There's too much going on. Too many have to look up and see what this building does. Yum Yum Island. This one really, I hovered with dropping this down. It works well with kids though. So this rating is for children. And this is basically a game where you're kind of blindfoldedly putting your hand out and everyone else is telling you where to drop stuff on a group of islands on the board. Kill the Unicorns, another game that has a rating from working with kids. This is a game that sounds more terrible than it is. I mean, you are trying to kill unicorns or get rid of unicorns. There's no blood or gore in it per se, but it's silly, it's fun, and it's a funny card game that works for kids. Bosk. Bosk is a really neat game in which you are dropping leaves out on the board. The game essentially is two halves. You're putting trees out on the board for the first half, and the second half you will be dropping leaves that score you points. It's a really nicely done abstract game. Trapper Keeper, the game. This comes in a little Trapper Keeper. Now, a lot of this is nostalgia. For sure, but the game itself works really well. It's a drafting game where you're drafting cards and cards will score in different ways, and I think it works really well as a welcoming game, and a game that you can get into the hobby with. Fallout Shelter, the board game. I never played Fallout Shelter, the app, until after the board game. I actually didn't really like it that much, but this takes that and puts it into a really nice, compact dice game. I was really surprised with how well this was. You'll look and see it was one of our biggest surprises of 2020. Mutant. This is an abstract game with animals. You have different groups of animals out there, and you are collecting them and moving your piece off of animals to collect other animals. Each animal gives you a special ability. I think it's nice quality. This is an overlooked game that I think works really well. I also go look at Arcadia Quest, along with its expansion, Build a Robot. Build a Robot's a fine expansion, really fun. You get to build a little robot made of two different pieces. I actually just got my Arcadia Quest robots painted, finally, this week. But it's kind of like the Pets expansion for Arcadia Quest. Then two fantastic games, Arcadia Quest itself, which is a reworking and actually, in my opinion, a better done version than Arcadia Quest. I think I like Arcadia Quest's theme slightly better, but Arcadia Quest, the game plays really smoothly, really well. And then Forgotten Waters. Forgotten Waters, what an amazing game. And I almost want to raise this one to a 10 because of what they just did. They just had a downloadable pack that adds event cards that go into the other scenarios. This game where you are cooperatively going through a book and placing workers and going through a story, it is absolutely fantastic. 5 years ago, I took a look at Swinging Jive Cat Voodoo Lounge. It's a hip game, or you're making fun of hipsters. It's okay. The game itself is nothing to get that excited about, but it has this cool looking vibe and cool components, and I see that people would like it because of that. 12 Days is a game where you're passing cards around a table based on the 12 Days of Christmas. There's a lot of 12 Days of Christmas games, and this is one of the okayer ones. Tales and Games Little Red Riding Hood. This is from the series of Tales and Games. Hare and Tortoise is probably the best of this series, but Little Red Riding Hood is fine. It's okay. And actually, I was looking at this one and thinking, wow, of all the Tales and Games, I haven't even thought of this one almost in 5 years, so I'll take that into account. Scoundrel Society is a little card game from Action Phase Games that I thought was pretty fun. I think that the production of the game could have been brought up maybe a bit more, but this one got very little love. It's a simultaneous selection style game. I tend to like those. Like I said, I think this one's a little underrated. And Escape the Room, Mystery at Stargazer's Manor. This is an escape room game, but this one is definitely geared towards kids. I played this with my kids 5 years ago. We had a blast. It wasn't particularly difficult, but I don't necessarily always need a difficult game to play with my kids. World's Fair 1893. Well, I know this one's 5 years ago because they just announced a 5-year version of this with nicer pieces. This is a solid, welcoming game. It's easy to play. You're moving a piece around, collecting cards, and working back and forth. This isn't a game, I like this game a lot. Actually, I think it's really well done. I don't know that I was asking for a 5-year version of it, but we'll see. Maybe it will go up when the new version comes out. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Dice Masters. This is one of the first Dice Masters game to come in a standalone box, and it brought the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I like Dice Masters a lot. I like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. This was an easy mix for me. Quadropolis from Days of Wonder. This city building game. This one is certainly one of the more overlooked Days of Wonder games. This has a cool grid where you're placing a worker along the outside of the city to grab tiles and then take those tiles and put them in your city where they score in different ways. A family game, which works fine. An advanced game, which I think is really well done. This is a game that I'll still play now. I think it's an excellent game. Millennial Blades. Now this one I dropped slightly. Millennial Blades is a game about collecting card games, about collecting collectible card games. It's so fascinating. It's so neat. You are grabbing cards, building this up, and then you play the card game in between. I dropped it just slightly because it's so weird and so unique. I have a hard time getting it to the table, getting other people to play it, although the fans of it are certainly huge fans of this game. It's from Level 99. They make really good stuff. This is one of the coolest games that they've made, and I still enjoy it. Time Stories, Prophecy of Dragons. This is a really sad one for me to talk about because this is a 10. It's still a 10. This is the pinnacle of my experience with Time Stories. This was so amazing. I loved the first Time Stories. The second one I liked. The third one here I loved again. And I said, wow, where can I go from here? Well, the answer is downhill. But this is my favorite of all the expansion for Time Stories. I love the fantasy, and this introduced a huge world outside of the focus missions that got me so excited and bitterly disappointed me later on. But I'm not going to hold it against this first expansion. All right, 10 years ago, Pooh, the card game. Yeah, what am I supposed to say? Read the name. Con. This is an abstract game that I had to go and actually watch part of my review because I could not remember how to play it. As you move these cons around and dropped out yurts around the board, I wouldn't play it today. My Kind of Town. This is from Chad Ellis from Your Move Games, a 2-player. It's very symbols and abstract, and again, this is the kind of game that I just look at it now and go, I can't really justify this game just doesn't even look that good. Monkey See, Monkey Do, a game for kids, copying other people. Pajaggle boards. This is put these little gears inside these boards, but all the gears have different numbers of teeth and sizes. It's an interesting idea. It's a cool concept, but it wasn't a good game. Picnic Blitz. Hey, ants coming to steal stuff. Again, this is one I think that it could have looked better. I'm looking back at these 10-year-old games and seeing the graphic design. For many of them, hasn't held up well. On the other hand, Isla Dorada, this graphic design holds up really well, has miniatures in a game that doesn't need miniatures, has really great artwork, but the game itself is kind of okay. You're all moving the same piece around the board. I was kind of taken with it when I first played it, and now I look at it and go, yeah, it's interesting, but it hasn't held up well over 10 years. The gameplay. Gosu, a little card game, almost has the feel of a collectible card game as you're putting people out in front of you in different locations and goblins and whatever. Not just goblins, there's all kinds of creatures in this game. It's okay. That's the theme for this 10 years ago slot here. Hotel Samoa from Christian Amundsen Osby. I really like his stuff normally. Bringing in tourists to a hotel, I thought it'd be a lot more exciting. It was not. It's just an okay game about getting tourists into your hotel. Last Call, the bartender game. This is a really weird one. It's from Watzelpalag, and they tend to make games with fun, toy-looking pieces. This is no exception. It's a bartending game with little fun plastic, like alcohol things that look like they would go into a kitchen for a kid, which is a really weird thing. You know, my kids are like, oh, look at me, I built my own little bar. Yeah, I don't know if I want my kids playing with that. So it's kind of just a weird mix there. The game was okay, but if you want some little toy alcohol bottles. Radis. I know Z likes this game more than I do. I think Radis is a fine game with some cool expansions, but it just falls shy for me because it feels a little samey after a while. But it has an interesting theme, kind of a dark theme, but it's an older theme, but it has some neat mechanisms, so I'll give it that for sure. Hornet Leader, Carrier Air Operations. This is a solitaire game from DVG Games. It sure introduced me to the idea of these games, the realization that I don't want to play any more of them, but I have to give it credit. It did a good job of you flying a jet. Merchants and Marauders. I really struggle with this one, folks. I thought about dropping it down to a 6. I like Merchants and Marauders. Idea. I feel like there's a big flaw in the game where when you go to a port, there's a lot of actions you can do, and it brings the game down to a crawl. But you can be a merchant or you can be a pirate, Merchants and Marauders. I would love to see a redone version of this someday. Nightfall. This is an intriguing deck building game where you're werewolves and vampires. It's werewolves versus vampires versus humans. It's a cool theme. It has some really neat ideas. It brings into some chaining. I don't think it holds up as well as other deck building games. I haven't gone back to play it and the expansions, and I don't know when I look at the cards, the best set of cards out there, but it did some cool ideas and it felt different than everything else. Pastiche, an art game about collecting colors and painting paintings. There's a lot of these games out there now, and I think 10 years later, Pastiche is still one of the best of that bunch. And then Magical Athlete. 10 years now since I played Magical Athlete. This game looks terrible. Some of the worst graphic design you ever play. It sounds awful when I explain the rules. And yet I've played Magical Athlete more than every other game from 10 years ago combined since then. It is that much fun. It is entertaining. I have a custom set of the game itself now. I keep waiting for a reprint of this game. If it wasn't for the bad graphic design and the fact that it sounds terrible, roll a die, move your guy around, first person to get around the board wins. But it's so silly and entertaining, I just love it. So that's certainly one. If you ever find an old copy of this, check it out. You will probably be pleasantly surprised. So those are the games that I reviewed 1, 5, and 10 years ago. Thanks so much for watching Lookback. I'm Tom Vasel. We'll see you next time.